Tahi he mihi ki ngā atua kaurangi nui, raua mei papatua nuku. Tuarua rā he mihi ki te Ngāi tua huriri, ko te mihi tua toru ki te taumata kōrero. Hei rāwei ki tēnei wānanga nei, tēnei tātou katoa. Hei uri oho no Ngāti Piki o mei Tainui, called John Reid tōku ingoa. A very warm greeting to you all. I just began by acknowledging the natural world around us and the indigenous people to this area, Ngāi tua huriri. And also our wonderful panel of speakers. I also said how awesome it is to be here today, and also I acknowledge the tribes that I descend from, Ngāti Piki and Tainui. My name is John Reid, and I'm the moderator for the session today. I thought I'd begin by providing you a little bit of background, particularly for our international guests, of what might be considered the quiet revolution that's taking place in New Zealand. Over the past 2 to 3 decades, Māori have emerged as significant players in agriculture, forestry, and fishing. This is due to several reasons, 2 of which stand out. The first is the state withdrew its control over Māori land, and the second was the Treaty of Waitangi settlement process, in which iwi or tribes were given reparations for the egregious injustices of colonisation. And these reparations included, amongst other things, the return of resources, including farmland, forest estate, and fishing quota. Now, Māori entities now own 35% of the fishing industry, 30% of the sheep and beef industry, 28% of production forestry, which will grow to about 40% over the next 12 years, 10% of the dairy industry, and about 5% of horticulture. And the growth of ownership is growing at about 1% per annum, which means that over the coming decades, Māori will come to own, operate, and control the majority of New Zealand's primary sectors. Now, the treaty settlement process itself has been a resounding success. 97% of iwi have established successful commercial entities with average growth rates sitting between 7 and 9%. And what makes this success even more interesting and impressive is that they're also leading New Zealand's innovations around on reducing their environmental footprints to net zero and even positive environmental footprints. And Lisa didn't talk about this earlier this morning, but Ngāi Tahu, New Zealand's wealthiest tribe, is already carbon neutral or net neutral across its entire Te Rūnanga group, and already has nutrient standards in terms of its agricultural emissions that are below proposed national standards. However, this isn't where the innovation ends. These businesses aren't responsive to shareholders in the way a normal corporation might be. They're responsive to elected community representatives of indigenous owners, for whom the land and water are actually family members and ancestors that must be treated with reverence, awe, care, and respect. At the same time, these communities are feeling these reverberating effects of colonisation, and on a daily basis feel issues of food insecurity and social problems, which Lisa touched upon. Therefore, they sorely need these businesses to be successful, to be profitable, to invest back into their communities. At the same time, tending to the land and waters in a way that they can provide for current and future generations. Mō tātou a mō ka uri a muri aki nei. This quiet revolution has global implications. In reality, they represent new models of operating, where the best of new technologies, management approaches, engineering solutions, and governance are being combined with indigenous wisdom traditions, setting the grounds for regenerative intergenerational wealth creation that is directly responsible and responsive to communities. The leaders here today are heavily involved in leaders in this transformation. Our first speaker, Jan, a tribal member of Ngāti Tūwharetoa, Ngāti Raukawa Te Ao ki te Tonga, Te Atiawa and Ngāti Tama, is involved in so many areas of quiet revolution, it's hard to know where to start. He's been instrumental as a governor in Māori land trusts and leading regenerative farming transitions, whilst also directing and working with organisations focused on landscape scale transformations. Simultaneously, he has networked with indigenous groups internationally in driving the uptake and use of new generation remote sensing technologies. Jan's day job is as Principal of Strategy Development for the newly formed philanthropic foundation Biome Trust. Overall, his work extends across environment, regenerative agriculture, marakai, education, human health, well-being, as well as connection, capability, and capacity development in these areas. Miriana Stephens is a tribal member of Ngāti Rārua and has been instrumental as a leading executive of Māori corporate entities and as a tribal governor. In 2016, she was awarded the Aotearoa New Zealand Māori Woman Business Leader Award in recognition of outstanding success and excellence in business. She is General Manager at Auora, an associated business of Wakatu Incorporation that invests in a portfolio of nutrition and ingredient applications, which are sourced from the natural biomatter of Aotearoa. She also serves as a trustee of Agmart, Te Awhina Marae, and Te Runanga o Ngāti Rārua, and actively participates in national Māori food and beverage clusters and industry. Our final speaker, Dr Jay Whitehead, is a tribal member of Ngāi Tahu. He has been instrumental in developing management tools that support tribal governing bodies in making complex commercial decisions that consider environment, profit, and people. His work has enabled progressive Māori organisations to secure approximately 100 million in funding and investment, catalysing advancements in the primary industries. Jay also noted that his first real job was as a sponsored downhill mountain biker with 21 broken bones later, he's still at it. And yeah, you have a very patient wife and daughter, Jay. Jan.
Kia mai no tātou. Mihi pānui ki ngai tua hururi, mana whenua ki tēnei whenua, me o whānau pānui katoa o ngai tau. E ngā mane, e ngā reo, e ngā hauewha, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Thank you, John. Kia koutou. So I am excited, actually really excited by the previous speakers this morning and the last few on technology. I was a technologist and there's an incredible amount of technology on our horizon coming into play in our fields, in our mountains and in our landscapes that we work in. What I'm really interested in and what I'm really here to explore with our panel here is how do we apply and utilise technology whilst implementing integrity and authenticity from the values that perpetuate from our Māori cosmology and from our ancestors. And how do we do that well? Because what we've been doing up until now hasn't gone that well, right? If you look at all the metrics around climate change, biodiversity loss, water quality, human deprivation, inequity is pervasive and increasing. I'm really interested in how we turn that around. I began my career as a technologist and avionics systems engineer, but grew up and live under the adage, the more you learn, the less you know. And I was able to live largely an outdoor life as a teenager and as a child. My mother's whakatauki was get outside and play. And if the tide was right, on your way home, bring some mussels and some flounder. I was lucky to live in that landscape. In my early career, I was also in my spare time a mountaineer and taking people out into the outdoors and realising how people became well when they were in the outdoors in secure environments in a connected group. And it's that kind of realisation of the importance of how people relate to the environment can perpetuate and should perpetuate the way we do business today. I take my hat off to Lisa Tumuhai this morning and the wisdom and the values that she spoke to, and I want to relate back to four of them. Whanaungatanga, relationality, how we connect with each other well, and how actually through whakapapa all things are connected. She also spoke to manaakitanga, respectful engagement, and how we uplift the mana of all who we work with and who we associate with, not just ourselves, actually in service to the greater purpose, be it our community, our tribe, our maunga, our awa. We're actually humble beings and we should be serving and in service to those things that are greater to ourselves. That's manaakitanga. Tōhungatanga, expertise was how she related it this morning. I think it was the application of ancient wisdom. Coloniality has suppressed tohungatanga, and yet we are still trying to learn, and we are trying to re-enliven the ancient wisdom of our forefathers. And when you travel in different parts of the world, and I've had the privilege of being in Ecuador recently, you can see that the cosmological integrity and authenticity of shamanism as it relates to tohungatanga here in New Zealand. The actual basis of connecting, relationality, manaakitanga, kaitiakitanga, etc. are the same. There is a common wisdom across all of the indigenous knowledge systems. How do we apply that well here and apply the technologies well in these spaces? I'll talk through a couple of projects or landscapes I've been involved with for a wee while now. One is a Taranaki Maunga project. It was a restoration of a large landscape, which is a national park in Taranaki in the North Island. Most here will remember it, will know it. It's an iconic maunga with a 9.6 kilometre national park radius around it, in amongst a landscape dominated by dairy and food production. The mission, he kawa ora, to restore that mountain back to life. It's been in progress for around 8 years now, and largely the decisions that we made in both creating the board, the structures, and the way we made decisions to deploy technology, we drew from the values that Lisa spoke to this morning. We said to our team early on, it's not actually about the success of the institution of the group that was doing the work. It was actually about the success of that whole community. It was how can every iwi group connect to that maunga more relevantly? How can the whole community feel like they're contributing to something bigger than themselves? 8 years on, we've got to a place now where I can wholeheartedly say that there are a lot more, almost that whole region can see that maunga and have better access to it and have been able to contribute to the restoration of that mountain. And there's so much more to come. At the same time, the iwi leaders from that place were about to sit down and develop their treaty settlement over Taranaki Maunga. That's now out for ratification across that region and the tribal entities, the 8 entities that make that up. And they've really gone to the next level. They've actually put those values into legislative deeds, and they've also designed them so that they can perpetuate and be realised throughout the whole landscape. So even though the legislation hasn't quite landed yet, it's still being ratified, but I'm pretty sure it will, those values are already being talked about and being taken up by other entities all around that region. Large-scale catchment restoration projects where the river flows off that maunga out into the farming landscape, they're now talking about how to connect. They're now talking about regenerative farm practices. How can we curate data with Māori data sovereignty principles where we are looking to manifest and uphold and enrich the mana of all that are concerned in these projects? There's a lot of work to do, but if we can make better decisions with the technology, we can actually reverse and flip the script on what's been happening in the past. We're utilising tools like eDNA to measure either the abundance or the absence of both the good guys, the predators, and also the taonga species, the birds and the rest of the flora and fauna that we wish to protect. We're using remote sensing technology. We're importing technology from offshore with planet.com of how to measure through satellite networks the changing flora every day. And then we'll be able to shortly adapt that with high-resolution LiDAR platforms to actually tell us the change of land use practice or predator control practice and what impact that is having on the growth and vegetation in that landscape on a daily basis. Now that's phenomenal. But we're making those decisions based on those values that I spoke to earlier. We are using AI to analyse digital cameras in the landscape to also measure the presence, absence of both the good guys, the taonga species, the birds we're looking to restore and the rest of the ecosystem, as well as looking for that last vestige of predator that remains, a rat, a stoat, or a ferret. It's incredibly hard work, but we realise that we've built a network of trust between iwi, between national government entities like DOC, through the local government entities, the Taranaki Regional Council, businesses and communities for a common purpose with values intact. Another scenario I'll talk to is Opepe Land Trust. Part Part of my whakapapa tūwhare tour is Taupō region, and there's Opepe Land Trust as a farm trust with 5,000 owners, 30,000 beneficiaries, settled at the north end of Lake Taupō. It's 8,000 hectare farming enterprise, 2 dairy platforms, a large-scale sheep and beef, forestry, kānuka, mānuka. Quite a diverse enterprise, but not atypical for Māori farm owners under the Ahu Whenua Land Trust regime. We are working to build a greater collective with the council, with energy providers, with other land trusts that connect to tauhara maunga for a similar pathway. How do we flip the standard production models that have been in place for farming into regenerative? We've got some of the country's best farm coaches now looking at focusing not on so much the stock, but the soil. We're farming the restoration of the soil by reducing synthetic fertilisers, by enhancing natural fertilisers, by reducing reliance on PKA food, reducing stock numbers, getting the people, the team and the wider whānau to connect to the journey and understand why we're doing it as a large part of the work. As well as applying the same technologies that I've spoken to in the other project with satellites and soil sensors and carbon sensors, etc., we also want to do the basics on the ground. How do we know that our kaumātua have firewood throughout the winter? How do we know that we are able to supply nutrient-dense food locally grown when times are tough? We've got more pandemics to come. We've got storms to come. We need to be resilient. We need to know that we can serve our people at place with our food systems with integrity and authenticity regardless of what comes. And we want to do that in a way which creates pathways for that whole community to grow and succeed. If we can do it well, we aim to share the technology, the modes and the values through our community at large. Kia ora mai tātou katoa.
E rauranga mā tēnā koutou katoa, te mana whenua tēnā koutou, ngā mana e tau nei tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. I actually come from the best 2 places in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Tauranga Moana, where I'm of Ngāi descent, and it must be a food thing with me because when I think about tauranga, I think about titiko, which is a traditional food source, and of course my whānau love to grow kiwi fruit and avocados. And of course, the other best place in Aotearoa, New Zealand is the metropolis of Motueka. My grandparents grew the good things in life, tobacco and hops. I'm pleased to say we still do grow hops, but of course when I think about the abundance of kai that we have there, it's pretty amazing. I was born and raised by my grandparents, and it was on the marae, and my cousin has a really great saying, and it's a service is beneath you, then leadership is beyond you. And I often reflect with that about my upbringing because we used to have a lot of seasonal workers come in, Māori seasonal workers coming into Motueka to help us with harvest. And my grandmother would be down the main street of Motueka, and she would be doing this massive karanga, a call to the seasonal workers who would come into town, and of course I would hide. I'd say, Nan, that's not cool. But that was her way of manaaki, of welcoming people into our area. And of course at that time too, we were wanting to get our land back, and you sort of rock up at the marae and they say, oh, we need some lawyers and accountants. And next minute, that's where I went to. I went to law school, actually started off here in Christchurch at Canterbury. And, and I just thought actually we weren't just Māori on the marae or at home, but we were also Māori in business. And of course that was my introduction to Wakatū Incorporation, a Māori family business. We are the customary landowners from Mōhua Golden Bay into Motueka and then across into Whakatū, Nelson. So we're the largest private landowner in the top of the south. And I think we represent the customary owners. They belong to 4 tribal groups, Ngāti Rārua, Te Atiawa, Ngāti Tama and also Ngāti Koata. In Wakatū we have a 500-year intergenerational vision. And I think it's fair to say that I don't wake up, when I'm not scared and excited, because actually it's quite a massive responsibility. But when I think about the leadership, I think about that vision, and my whānau would say it has been by design. Personally, I came through the education program, scholarship program, then into the associate director program, and then 14 years ago was elected onto the board of governors of Wakatu by the families. And because I'm a glutton for punishment, I took an executive role, because when you think about 500 years, te pai tāwhiti, and looking into that distant future, how do you bring that forward? So the whānau challenged me. They said, yes, Grasshopper, you can go to Stanford and you can be part of Te Hono, but you must come back with, we're exporting, we've got all these fantastic businesses, but what does the next 100 years look like? And so that was when Ōora was born, and Ōora means to navigate towards health and well-being. So I was able to have a startup within the engine, and then also think about those intergenerational programs of work that we would need in order to build resilience. And Whenua Ora came along. It's our land and water wellbeing program, so that's in train across the businesses. And then one of the big R&D projects we've got is called Taketake Tāne, and that's our indigenous organisms program. And what we could see, when you think starting to think what was happening out in the world, who was going to protect those taonga, the plants, the animals, the birds, the insects, fungi, our micro, macro algae, our native yeasts. Actually, who are going to be the stewards of those taonga? And so we started the journey. We started with the plant life in Te Tauihu, and we mapped all of those. And the team was saying to me, where are the boundaries? Where, are we going to take the Māori appellate court? Because we'd had an interesting conversation with Ngāi Tahu. We'd also got our territorial boundaries. And then, our kaumātua, one of our elders said, actually the plants will tell you where they start and where they finish. And so in New Zealand, we have 2,800 plants. 2,134 of those are found in Te Tauihu. And then only 136 of them are endemic, are only found in Te Tauihu. And then 69 of them have no formal name. And I think the big importance of that particular program of work was actually reconnecting our whānau back to their taonga, back to those plants and back to the whenua. And so now we're on, the journey of really building that work out. And so it's the documentation of our traditional knowledge. It's also around the science that has happened with those taonga species. And then, of course, when you think about the relationship, we use a model called access benefit sharing. So how we're accessing those plants, how we're benefiting, and then how we're sharing that knowledge with our families and others is quite fundamental. And of course, when we look at other ways of doing things, we had the privilege of travelling to Peru. And so 4 of us went on that journey, went on that mission. We weren't too sure what we might find, but we met up with 7 hapu, 7 small community groups, indigenous, who had formed a potato park. And when we went there, actually we were greeted, and they said, they knew, obviously had been engaging with Māori communities for a long time. But they also said to us that there were 3 governments in the world that they did not trust, and one of them was New Zealand. And I said, well, why is that? And basically, what had happened was that we had gone there and, pretty much stolen their genetics when it came to alpacas. And so, anyway, we're like, okay. But we managed to be able to, talk about that and think about our relationships as Indigenous peoples. But the other thing, when we met their governing board, we met, when they introduced themselves, it was the governor of the water, it was the governor of the maunga of the mountain. And their absolute connection and relationship with nature was quite phenomenal. The technology, you know, when we viewed their seed bank, and so they're the keepers of potatoes, you know, of kumara, of sweet potatoes, and actually, you know, the biotech, the way that they had built those systems were far superior than what I've seen anywhere else in the world. And then they said to us, "Oh, so you're exporting?" And yes. And they said, "Oh, so and so you feed your communities?" And actually, you know, when you think about our journey and systems and practices that were adopted that aren't actually potentially ours, you know, there was a bit of a reflection there. And so what happened was we had this, you know, to be fair, I haven't eaten so many potatoes. I had potatoes for bloody breakfast, you know, alcohol, lunch, whatever. Then I got home, my daughter said, "Oh, Mum, I've cooked your tea, mashed potatoes." I was like, "Oh." But what they said to us was, you know, when thinking about resilience, you know, would you consider having, you know, if you build your seed bank, potentially being kaitiaki, being custodians, you know, of those, you know, of those taonga. And of course, you know, that's a very big ask. And we said, well, there's only 4 of us, we'd have to go back and, you know, talk about that. But what that did, actually, that was an action when we got back, is that we started to, again, think about how we reconnect our whānau back to their whenua. And Karioi is a project that we have in Karioi and Māori, is the big feast. We went back, we found some land, and we said, actually, you know what? We're going to go back and we're going to do the big mara. Where I come from, Te Mātu is known as the Big Garden. We were, you know, the first farmers, providores. We had 3 of the export ships that were going out of Nelson, not new to us. But actually, how are we going to transition into a tikanga-led regenerative estate? And so we started that program of actually getting back on the land, planting our kumara, planting our potatoes, and back in, you know, with the family. So I just want to be able to show you a short video of that particular program.
E rongo, e ai, tēnā whapito kurakuratu, e tū nei te tau, kei whia te pau e tūanga. Hei anō, tū whakamoa kia tīna. Tēnā, haime hui e, ai ki e.
Kia ora e te whānau o Wakatū. He uria hau no Ngāti Tama ki te tauihu, ko au te kaihauturu o Wakatū, ko Kurenza Johnston, tōku ingoa. Kia ora, my name's Kurenza Johnston, I'm the CEO of Wakatū. This piece of land that we're standing on is the piece of whenua that we've dedicated to what we're calling our karioi, or our indigenous crops program. One of the big programs of work that the Wakatū board approved last year is called our Whenua Order program. So that's a 20-year plan to transition all of our conventional growing methods on our land. So whether it's our vineyards or our apple orchards, kiwi fruit orchards, from conventional growing to what we're calling at the moment tikanga-led regenerative. We know at its heart it will be about protecting and restoring the mauri of the whenua and the water. So by the mauri I mean the health and the well-being of the land, and we know that by doing that, that will be reflected in our people. This project and the work that we're doing on the mara, and also, you know, all the different wānanga that we've been running, will be really key because it's helping us work out what tikanga-led regenerative means for us as the family. Once we've developed that work, we'll use it to help the different businesses transition. So whether it's our wine growing business or whether it's our apples or our hops, we will use that as the template to help the managers in the different parts transition into this new model.
One of our biggest challenges is trying to get our whānau back on the whenua to help. So part of that wānanga is just engaging with our whānau again and just trying to become a collective. I think a lot of people around the country don't have the opportunity that we have, in that we have a lot of land, and we want our whānau to feel comfortable walking on their land and working on their land and just being with their whenua again.
So distribution of the food is a fundamental aspect of what we are trying to achieve here. So a portion of the crops that we produce is retained for future cultivars of crops. A portion of it is retained for distribution to our families, and a portion of it is for sale. So we're hoping that that's kind of the holy trinity of something that's both viable and ethical in terms of growing food on the type of scale that we're talking about. This project for me is something that is really close to my heart. We're at the formative stages of something that could be incredibly transformative for our organisation. And all food production that Cornwall's involved with, transformative for our region and transformative for our families. And I don't say that lightly. This pilot is where we're kind of working out what the future might look like. So ultimately what I'd say to our whānau out here listening to this video is this project's all about you.
Kia ora, I was just going to end with, I know that we heard one of our speakers this morning saying that, those who adopt technology will survive. I don't agree with that. I think that those who align themselves with indigenous communities and values will survive. Nō reira, tēnā rā tātou katoa.
Kia ora tātou, he uri aho no kai Tahu me kati māmawe ko Jay tōku ingoa. Yeah, there he is. So, a few people have talked about values already, and I want to take a bit further, maybe to a bit of a dark and spooky place, because I'm afflicted with a terrible disease called statistics. But I'm also an economist, so I've got to be careful here, because I want to talk about values, and my breed usually talks about the far less impressive value. And English is bizarre, yeah, because values are essentially the amount of money that something's worth, in our everyday language anyway. And values are our moral principles and beliefs. Values are rarely at the core of Te Ao Māori, or the Māori world, as people have already mentioned. They're deeply codified into the culture in a way that makes them highly tangible and easy to grasp. Now, everybody everywhere has values, of course, but the problem is they can be quite sort of gooey, ephemeral things that are good on the front page of a website, but hard to really implement and practice. And values are as the others have said, they're the foundation of Māori culture and customs and practices and language. They inform the way that individuals and organizations interact with each other and with the wider world. And they're really holistic, combining elements of spirituality and environmentalism and social well-being and personal practices into this one interconnected whole. And I think this really deep connection to values, is part of, or can be an everyday part of life, rather than a sort of, intangible, ephemeral, nice to have out on the periphery. Over the past decade or so, we've been working with a whole lot of organizations on finding ways to incorporate values into really practical decision making. And this is some of them here. I talked about values being gooey things sometimes. Some of these organizations you wouldn't call gooey, the New Zealand Stock Exchange, for example. And what we've been doing is we've been quantifying values in a way that helps with decision making, in a way that drives sustainable transformations. We've been doing this by incorporating an indigenous worldview, the mātauranga Māori, with Western science and statistics. And what it's allowed us to do is help these organizations make decisions that are highly aligned to the values of the people who are going to be affected by the decisions. And when you can see your values reflected in a decision, you're much more likely to support that decision. You're much more likely to be motivated to go along with it. If you don't see your values reflected in that decision, you're likely to push back and resist the decision. And this is like a really important point for sustainability, because sustainability is essentially an exercise in behavior change. And if we want people to change their behaviors, then we better make sure our policies and our decisions align with the values of the people we want to change. And one of the key points here, though, is that often people's values are reflected in a policy, but they just don't see it. The connection's faint, and what we do is we try to make that connection to values really obvious. And there's a great quote by the late great chef and author Anthony Bourdain to really illustrate the role of values. And he said, "I understand there's a guy inside me who wants to lay in bed, smoke weed all day, and watch cartoons and old movies. My whole life is a series of strategies to avoid and outwit that guy." And this is where values are important, because values give weight to our preferences, which is particularly important when you have a really complex decision in which you're never going to find an option that meets all your preferences or everyone's preferences. And sustainability is essentially a game of trade-offs. And this is where values are really helpful, is that they allow us to make decisions when faced with important trade-offs. And so, thinking back to that Bourdain quote, values allow us to look beyond our immediate wants and desires and reflect on deeper concerns. So back to the economics. I asked ChatGPT to write an economics joke. It did so. That's the only funny part. So preferences are what is desired, and values are what is desirable. This is the simple way to think about it. Economics tends to focus on preferences, but there are many more preferences than there are values. So putting on a efficiency maximizing economist hat here, it makes sense to look at values as a really efficient way to make good decisions. Now, you might say, values there is a bit too gooey, but, it's not very practical for me. Well, you probably say that. Most people say that. And I want to run through a few examples of how this GUI approach actually comes to be a very practical decision-making framework. And I'm not going to get into how. This is using the dark arts of multi-criteria decision analysis, and there's about one person in the room who's excited about that. But I just want to give a few quick examples of some really high-level insights here. So these are four organizations that we've worked with. I'm not going to say who, but they're all Māori organizations, and we're just looking at high-level values here, the 4 pillars of sustainability, and what is their importance in decision-making. You can see in the aquaculture example, environmental well-being being the most important consideration, same with agricultural land use. Fisheries, social and cultural well-being being at the top, and strategic planning. This was a very big marae, looking at what do they want to do over the next 20 years. Financial growth being the most important. And this is a set of individual responses for the fisheries example. And what you can see is that people's preferences vary dramatically. They also vary depending on the situation too. Your values at home are not the same as your values at work. They're not the same as your values playing sport. That's very context dependent. How this can be really useful is, for this fisheries company, they want to target their decision making to different types of stakeholders. They might want to target it to their customers, or through their value chains, or their producers, actually, their fishers, people, within the company. We can cut and manipulate these sort of responses to be able to say who exactly cares about what and how can we meet their needs. And this is sort of how it comes together in a land use planning scenario. So you have a whole bunch of values. We've gathered everyone's preferences for those values. We've assigned the values to different options, which are along the bottom there. And this is a ranking. So the lower the number, the higher the ranking. And we can see right down the end, there's one option that's at the top, and they flow through to the least preferred option. I just want to finish on one more slide because this is an agriculture-y thing. And this is probably the most prickly example of them all. So this is trying to decide on a nutrient load reduction mechanism for a mid-Canterbury water catchment. And we've got some value criteria. We've got whether they're equitable, whether they're effective, whether they're practical, whether they're integrated. And then we've got a whole bunch of options, and the farmers themselves have gone through this process, and now we know from that list of options which is going to be the most acceptable at that value level through to the least acceptable, being a cap and trade system at the bottom. So I just want to leave you with the thought here that what I've talked about is not mātauranga Māori and Western science as two different systems, but as two ways of seeing the world that can be very tightly integrated in a super practical way to make decisions. If you want to know more, get in touch. Thanks.
So I think what became apparent through across our speakers is the fact that all of these individuals have focused in pretty closely on relationships and connectivity and relationships to place and how values get incorporated within an organisation. There hasn't been a lot of talk about bottom lines, management theories, and a whole range of other things you would normally see within a discussion around how you extend, and how you grow in grow in the food and fibre industries. What that means is that it shows that where the growth and what's stimulating that growth is in the soft skills and in the interconnectivity and the relationships into communities and relationships to land. And it's with that view in mind that I think my first question that I'll pose to the panel is the question about intergenerational thinking. What we see is that often our countries are tied into short election cycles or very short time frames of thinking without very long-term horizons embedded within values, as Jay has very nicely outlined, and how we can stretch that out, our thinking, to be long-term and to be really embedded within our values. So I'll pass that first to you.
Sure. Kia ora no. Interesting coherence between the kōrero, actually. We had no practice at all. Good question. Thanks, John. Look, I think it comes down to how you view your service contribution to the world and how you can see the challenges that are in front of yourself as part of an organisation and how that might perpetuate to the kind of the matamatu, the vitality of your place and your organisation in relationship to that place. And it plays out in lots of ways. I think one of the things I didn't talk to, and I think everyone here would talk to, is how much we invest in our capacity and capability. Miriana talked to it a wee bit with her, associate directorship years ago. Most Māori organisations do a lot of investment in bringing uri, our rangatahi, into roles sooner rather than later as a matter of normal operating procedure. Opepe, Taranaki Maunga, all the other entities I'm involved with have a wide span of gender and age in their governance groups and are building more into it as their resources allow. So I think we are continuously looking to refresh the paipai, so to speak, refresh the decision-making groups, and people like me are starting to get on a bit. How do we get out of the way and create space and mentor and guide others into the seats of, decision making or consensus decision making, and give them the confidence and courage and humility to be good servants going into the future. I'll just start off with that.
Yeah, kia ora. Thanks, Jan. And, I think about the time our leadership said to us, if you were to look back 500 years and to look forward 500 years, what would the vision be like? And what's your responsibility as your generation? Now, heck, and I was thinking about that. They pulled us together, and I think it was quite important for the leadership at that time, because if we don't own it, then we would have some challenges. So we were all brought together to actually think about, that 500-year intergenerational vision in the next 100 years. So that was on my watch. And so that, I don't think any of us that were in that room, and there was about 100 of us that didn't take that for granted. So that leadership and that vision, I think, is really quite remarkable. As Jan pointed out, yes, we have very active programs. We bring our 10-year-olds through to our 20-year-olds, and they don't just say, oh, that's my maunga, that's my mountain, that's my river, but they climb that mountain, they paddle that river. That relationship that they have with that whenua and the legacy is instilled in them at a young age, and they make those relationships, with their generation. So for us, that's quite important, their career planning, but that takes investment, and I'm really proud that our owners have seen that, as a priority for us, because actually you can build these empires, but they're nothing without the people. So that has been, and I mentioned that succession leadership by design, and so I think, and when I look at actually our meetings, our special general meetings, our AGMs, and we can have between 200 to 600 people at those events. About 25 to 30% are under the age of 25 years who attend, and they're standing up and they're saying, oh, what's your policy, or how are you going to give us, where's the housing? What's your decision-making process around how we're going to adapt to climate change? And so these are really, relevant and pertinent, questions and issues of their time. So again, the programs that we're running, how we connect in, are really important. But the other thing I would say, that my cousin, who is 80 years old, that sits on our board, the wisdom, the support and the security he gives when we're at the table making some, big decisions, there's not a day that I don't appreciate that too. So that intergenerational approach, we're all responsible, it's on our watch, how we collectively work together, to make those decisions is really important.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone wants to do good, but we have a data and information problem. Not that we have not enough, but we have too much. And, we see this so much in the science world, that we continually reinvent the same things over and over again, because nobody knows what everyone else is doing, because we're doing so many things. And I think this plays out in people's interconnections to the natural world and relationships with each other. There's so many possibilities things you can do, that it's very hard to find the things that you want to do. And yeah, maybe a step back is good. I was more scared by some of the early presentations this morning than excited, but yeah.
If I could just add to that for a moment, I think it was said this morning too, you have to look back to be able to go forward. And a lot of these programs of, bringing rangatahi through into governance and into running these projects and farms, etc., we're now being, it's probably been happening for a while, and more courageous and more overt, and both encouraging people to go to university to learn law and technology, etc., and employing that stuff. But at the same time, with even probably more emphasis now, is actually looking at the ancient wisdom. Karakia, waiata, motiatia, etc. There's a whole lot of knowledge imbued in these wisdom forms, spoken, sung language, that we've somewhat decolonise ourselves from, and we need to colonialise ourselves from. We need to get back to the wisdom way of learning and have more trust that there's a hell of a lot